Our speaker today, her name is not Chara. When you look at it, you want to say, well, that's Chara, but it's Chara Megelsh. And we were kind of joking about her name, that people will remember that name, you know. She's going to be famous someday because she's got this great name, Chara Megelsh. She's from Alabama. Her husband, Michael, is from Pennsylvania, and they moved to Blue Mountain in August. He is now the history professor at Blue Mountain Christian University, and he's also a blacksmith. And I met him before I met Chara. But Chara was born in Alabama and raised on the island of Cyprus. I hope you'll tell us a little bit more about that today. That must have been a great place to grow up.
That might be another museum moment.
She has a degree in wildlife science and pre-vet from the Auburn University. She's done some fun things like conducting marsh bird counts in the Mississippi Gulf, and just studied ornithology under some of the state's leading ornithologists. And you might see her when you visit one of my favorite places, Camp Creek. Is where she's working, Camp Creek Native Plants, and so we can't get much better than native plants and birds. Please welcome Chara.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for showing up today on a really beautiful day. I know it would be really tempting just to go outside, but I appreciate you coming and learning a little bit more about birds. I am not my husband. He has a very loud projecting voice, so if anybody can't hear me specifically in the back, please just give a wave or something, and I'll speak a little bit louder. But today we're going to be I'll be speaking on winter backyard birds. I bet you're wondering two things right now. First, how can anybody talk about birds for 30 to 45 minutes? And you're also probably wondering, how did anybody just get such a confusing name as mine? Not just the first name, the last name too. If you forget how to pronounce it, if you see me on the street and you say hey, you say Chara, you just say hey you. All of that is fine. I get that a whole lot. Here we go. So just a little bit about me. Jill already introduced me just a little bit, but my name is Chara. I'm a wildlife conservationist. I'm originally from Alabama, moved around a little bit, like she said. Lived in Cyprus, and I won't talk too much about that, especially because the birds are a little different in the Mediterranean than they are here. But that's where I grew up. That's where I really developed a passion for nature and for wildlife, and really taught me to appreciate just all the little intricacies of nature. But I got my degree in wildlife science pre-vet from Auburn University in 2017, and I have had multiple field jobs, mostly working with birds out in the fields. Now I am the social media and event coordinator at Camp Creek Native Plants, and that might seem a little odd. You know, you like birds and you're a wildlife conservationist. Why are you working at a nursery? But I deliberately sought employment there because their motto, my motto, they just go hand in hand. Their motto is restoring God's creation, which is exactly what I want to do with my life. Nature is a gift, and I just want to show other people the love that God has shown us through His design, through the beauty of nature, and to help restore it. It's a whole nother lecture to talk about the world population of all the animals, the birds, the insects. A lot of them are in decline, a lot of them need some help. I won't go too much into that, but part of my goal is to help support people in knowing how to support the environment so that we can be better stewards of the gift that we've been given. Just a little bit about my job. So, you know, how do I know about birds? This is how I know about birds. Working out in the field mostly is the best way to learn, but these are some pictures that I took from a job in Alabama. We were doing a lot of long-term monitoring projects on this nature preserve, mostly with birds, but a little bit of other species as well. Like if you look here, can you see the little bubble? Yes, little bubbles there. You see here, hopefully you can see the giant antenna that I'm carrying around on my shoulder. And no, I'm not trying to talk to aliens. I am trying to locate a gopher tortoise on the property. If you see this right here, it looks like a bunch of mud caked on his back, but that is actually a tracking device. And so I looked like I was absolutely crazy, but I ran around the property with this giant antenna trying to find these gopher tortoises. Most of our work was with birds though. Like the indigo bunting up here in the left-hand corner, we banded all these birds that we caught. We also banded hummingbirds. That was a very interesting experience. The tiny little band, I hope y'all can see that. That tiny little band, they came in the wrong size when my boss ordered them, and he actually had to use an X-Acto knife and shave off 1 millimeter off of each of these bands because they had to be 3 millimeters long, and they were 4. So he had to meticulously cut them. That was fun. I was glad I didn't have to do that. We did a lot of work with eastern bluebirds as well. This is a little nest with a very freshly hatched baby bluebird. And this is one of the baby bluebirds that I banded. We banded all of the hatchlings on the property. Wanted to see which ones were returning, and then if somebody found the band someplace else, then we would have the data to know where it came from and when it was banded. So did a lot of work with birds, and that's how I really got started. My mentor was my boss, and he taught me so much. But I continued my bird work this summer. I worked with Mississippi State, actually. I think you say Hail State? Yes. Is that what you say? Okay, Hail State. I worked with a grad student who had received some money for her research from the oil spill that happened in the Gulf. They realized in doing environmental impact surveys after the oil spill that they didn't actually know they didn't actually know how well the bird populations were doing there for these marsh birds that we were studying. And so she got money to do a 3-year-long project studying population sizes and where these birds lived relative to civilization, people, developments, factories, all those sorts of things. So that gave me some really good insight into marsh birds and taught me that I can wake up at 3 a.m. and still function throughout the day, 6 or 7 days a week. But we won't talk about my bird jobs for forever. Today we are going to talk about backyard winter birds. What exactly those are, what that means when we say backyard winter birds, how you can ID them, and then some of those tricks and tips and tools that I'll share with you guys. You can also use those to help identify other birds if you want to carry your backyard birding skills out into the wider field. Then some common questions that people have about winter backyard birds. I'll answer some of those. If you have any more questions, which I hope you do, I like talking about birds, I'd be happy to talk more about them with you at the end of the lecture. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And then a lot of people want to know how they can help their own backyard birds, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then don't panic, but there's a quiz at the end. It's not graded. No one else is going to know your grade. Just a way to maybe see if you learned anything at the end of this. So backyard birds, what makes them backyard birds? It's not a taxonomic group, it's not a scientific group, it's not even a set list of birds. These are just birds with general characteristics that make them generally like people's backyards, usually wherever you go. For the most part, they're going to be generalists, which means that they either just eat a bunch of different types of foods and they live in a bunch of different places. They're not too picky. They'll eat whatever bugs they can find. They'll eat whatever berries they can find, whatever nuts they can find. They're not usually too shy, so they'll kind of hang out in lots of different types of woody environments, shrubby environments, open canopy, closed canopy. They're just really not fussy, picky. They'll just live just about anywhere. The opposite of this, just to give y'all an example, because I think they're really cool examples, the opposite of a generalist is a specialist. You can have a habitat specialist, like red-cockaded woodpeckers. Really, really cool bird. There's a lot of conservation going into them because they're threatened in Alabama and all across the South. But the reason that they're threatened is because they're habitat specialists. They eat a bunch of different stuff, but they will only live in old pine growth forests. That's because old pine trees, they are affected by this certain rot that affects the heart of the pine, and then the red-cockaded woodpecker, it'll excavate that, and it won't live anywhere else. So that's an example of a habitat specialist. But a really cool example of a diet specialist is a koala. I think they're cool just because they're little bears. They're weird looking, but they're cute, but also they're very aggressive. They're weird animals. But they are diet specialists in that they can only survive on eucalyptus. It's the only thing that they eat. They only eat that. They can't live anywhere else where there's not eucalyptus. So that's an example of a diet specialist. That's the opposite of a generalist. Most of the backyard birds that you're gonna see in general, they're just gonna be generalists. And then another quality about these backyard birds is they're either going to be birds that live in this area year-round, they don't migrate, or they're medium migrants, meaning they don't take the migration of, say, a hummingbird or an albatross that will migrate across entire oceans and seas and thousands of miles. They'll be like the dark-eyed junco, who I'll show you a picture in just a minute. They just migrate from northern Canada, where they breed, down here to the south, and you'll see them during the winter when they're just hanging out, not breeding, doing their thing. They don't want to go all the way across the Gulf of Mexico, so they'll just stay here with us. So these are the type of birds that you'll see. I want to show you pictures in just a minute on the next slide of actual birds that you'll see in your backyard. I've got some pictures up, but first, just a little bit about how you can start learning how to distinguish each of these birds from each other. And I'd really like to stress that there really is no right way to be the perfect birder. A lot of people have a lot of different ways that they like to identify birds. Some people, like myself, I like to identify by sound. That's just how I learned. That's what I got comfortable with. That's what I find fun to do. So I prefer to bird by sound. But some people prefer to bird with binoculars. They like to actually look at the birds. They like to see them. They like to watch them just doing their silly, goofy thing. And so there really is no right or wrong way to bird, just whatever is enjoyable to you. But I'd like to just go over some tips, tricks, tools, questions to ask to help you start learning birds apart from each other. The most obvious one, kind of no duh, is sound and sight. Excuse me. Sound and sight, just by observing them and listening to them, that's the first, foremost bird ID thing that you can do. And you'll be using field marks, which are distinct markings that are easy for you to remember. Goes back to no real right way to bird. Some people, like myself, consider the little tuft, the little mohawk on the top of this tufted titmouse, that is a field mark for me. Whenever I see a small gray bird, and there's a lot of small gray birds out there, don't get discouraged. If I ever see a small gray bird and it has that little mohawk, I instantly know that's a tufted titmouse, and that's a field mark for me. But some people might look at, I hope you can see, right above the beak, he has black right above the beak, kind of on the bridge of his nose, what you would call it. So some people might consider that a field mark. It's whenever you have just a split second to catch a bird, you just want to pull something out really quickly that you can use to identify the bird. You can also use song and call. Birds, each bird has a unique song and it will have a unique call, also called a chip. The song's going to be the longer one that everybody's probably most familiar with, little trills and tweets. And then the call is usually just a one-note little chirp. And those are extremely difficult for me. Don't get discouraged if you can't tell them apart. I have a really difficult time. My mentor could. I don't know how he did it. I think it was a superpower, super hearing or something. but that is one way that you can tell them apart. And then size and shape, that is really helpful when it comes to telling birds apart, because you may not have time to, it may be too quick, or it might be very dark, not very visible. It might be kind of difficult to see details like field marks. It may not be calling, but size and shape are a really helpful way to tell birds apart. Each different group will have kind of a different shape. Like crows have a different shape, sparrows have a different shape, and I'd love to show you those in just a second. And then relative size. For example, the pileated woodpecker, which I just went over into the room over there, and there is a pileated woodpecker on display. You can actually go over into the other room when you come in onto the left and see an actual taxidermied pileated woodpecker, see the actual size of it. But it's an extremely large woodpecker, and I know that if I ever see a large bird, kind of black, kind of white, but can't really tell real markings other than that, large bird, it's flying between the trees, and I didn't hear it call when it was flying, that's probably a pileated woodpecker. Just by its size and the fact that it was flying high, those things tell me it's going to be a pileated woodpecker. Behavior, that's also a huge help when it comes to identifying birds. Are they alone? Are they in a group? Are they a really shy bird? Are they a really feisty bird? And then when and where. So this is a presentation on winter backyard birds. So you know the time of the year, but if you're birding in your backyard in the summer, or you want to take your birding outdoors, that's something that you have to think about, because some are going to migrate out of the area and some are going to be here all year. You're going to want to ask yourself, what elements am I close to? Like, am I close to a suburban area? Am I close to a pine stand? Am I close to water? All of those will help you narrow down the choices for what your bird actually is. And you'll also want to see note how it's foraging for food. Birds forage in a lot of different ways, and I find that extremely helpful. American robins, they like to pick around at the leaves on the ground. They usually do so in groups. So if I just have a quick second look at a brownish bird, maybe about that big, hanging out on the ground, just picking leaves, and then it flies away, it's probably an American robin. It's a good guess. So let's take some of these things that we talked about and actually look at some birds that you might find in your backyard. I hope you all recognize some. I have these in somewhat relative size, so I put the larger birds at the top, and they get smaller, as they go down. And just a little bit about each of them. You've got the northern cardinal, which I hope everybody's seen a northern cardinal. If not, you probably need to get outside a little bit more. Then we have the pileated woodpecker, which I talked about a second ago. You have the northern flicker, also a type of woodpecker, also called the yellow hammer. A lot of these birds, they might have different names sometimes. You have the blue jay, really cool bird. They're part of the Mimidae family, which is the mimic family. That's where the mimi comes from in the prefix. But the blue jays really like to imitate red-tailed hawks. So if you hear a hawk, maybe take another glance, because it might just be a blue jay trying to mess with you. Then you have the American robin. You have the cedar waxwing, which is a little more uncommon, but it's still a possibility depending on your backyard. So you do have the European starling. Its name will give a clue that this is not a native bird species. It's technically an invasive, but I wanted to include it because it is one that you're going to see a lot in your backyard, and they have some really weird calls and songs, and they're actually very pretty to look at, so I wanted to include that one. Interesting story about these birds is someone in New York City, they just decided to release some European starlings, and now we have starlings across North America, just in absolute abundance, all from this guy just releasing a few birds. The story goes that he wanted to have all of the birds that were in Shakespeare's literary works to be in America, which is not ecologically sound, but we're here now and we have a lot of starlings, and at least they're pretty, so. Then we have eastern bluebirds, house sparrows, house finches, dark-eyed juncos, which I mentioned earlier. They're the ones that breed in Canada and then they migrate down here. We have eastern phoebes, Carolina chickadees, tufted titmouses, brown-headed nuthatches, Carolina wrens. This is not an exhaustive list. I really wanted to add more, but I didn't want the pictures to be so small that nobody could see them. Also didn't want to exhaust y'all with just lists and lists of birds because everybody's backyard is going to be a little different. You might see all of these birds, you might only see two. It just kind of depends on your backyard. These are just generally birds that are not very shy usually. They're usually pretty loud. They're easy to spot because of their color, like the blue jay or the cardinal, and they're going to be here during the winter. But some things I wanted to point out are things like shape and size. So the pileated woodpecker is a lot bigger than the Carolina wren. Carolina wren is maybe that big, and the pileated woodpecker, you'll see the one in there, he's maybe that tall. His plume makes him a little bit taller. That's going to be a huge help. Things like body shape, you can really see the difference in body shape between the brown-headed nuthatch down here. Can y'all see that pretty well? Somewhat well, yeah. So the brown-headed nuthatch down here, they have, how would you describe it? It's a very, very sleek, compact form. Their tails aren't very long. It's a completely different shape from, say, the northern flicker up here, who has a little bit more of a longer neck. He's going to have tails. You also have field marks that, like the Carolina chickadee right here, he's got that black cap. That's very easy to see when you just see a bird flitting by. Black cap is something that's really easy to see. Eastern bluebird, they're bright blue and bright orange. I guess I gotta say war eagle because I went to Auburn University and we're blue and orange, so war eagle, I guess. They're bright and easy to see, and they're a different shape from the nuthatch. And something else I wanted to point out is, sorry, hold on. Don't look, it just jumped ahead for some reason. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. You'll also want to pay attention to sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism is basically just a difference in size or appearance between the males and the females. So I say that because it was confusing to me when I first started to bird, because you have all these different birds, and I didn't realize that some are the exact same bird, just the male and the female. So when you're looking in your backyard, you will see sexual dimorphism in birds like the northern cardinal up here. The male's really brightly red. He really wants to impress that lady, but the female cardinal, she's still big, she's still got some red, but she's a little lighter in color. The eastern bluebird is almost identical to the female, is almost identical to the male, but the female is just paler in hue, almost like she was out in the sun too long and she just got a little bleached. And that is how she looks. But then you also have birds like the house sparrow. These mess me up sometimes. You have the male house sparrow over here, and he has this pretty black bib, and he has this gorgeous brown head. But the female, she is just this, poor girl, she's just this drab little gray bird. So just be aware of that as you're learning birds. The last bird is the Mississippi state bird. So if y'all know what it is, or try to guess in your head. Okay, it's the northern mockingbird. It's the northern mockingbird. Good job if you knew that already. This is a state bird of Mississippi. It was designated in 1944. And people love it so much, it's actually the state bird in Arkansas, Florida, here in Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas. I think in part because it's just so abundant. This is one of those, it's year-round, it's pretty much everywhere. When I was looking up this bird, I actually found out something new that I didn't know before, which was that it was once threatened by the pet trade in the 1900s, interestingly enough. You see them everywhere now, but at one point, people like to put them in cages because they sing a lot. They sing a lot of different pretty tunes. And at one point, they had to put a stop to that because populations were struggling a little bit. So that's really interesting. They have a lot of different songs. Again, don't get discouraged. If you hear this one bird who's making a bunch of different funky calls, it's probably just a mockingbird. They're not trying to be malicious, they just really like to sing. So don't blame them, they're just being mockingbirds. Oh, this is an example, a really good example of a bird that is extremely feisty, which is another good indicator of what the bird is. So a lot of these backyard winter birds, they're not going to be as shy, but when you take your birding out of your backyard, there are some birds that are very shy, and some birds, like the mockingbirds, that want to fight everything else. So you're just seeing this bird flying around, it's attacking a hawk, it's probably a crow, or more than likely it's a northern mockingbird. So good on them, I guess, getting rid of the red-tailed hawks. So before I go on, I just wanted to introduce you guys to some tools for birding that I find incredibly useful to myself, and I always recommend them anybody that wants to casually learn about birds or learn about them more in depth. Merlin, it is like having a bird guide in your pocket, and it's easier, I think, in fact, because it will give you a list of a few questions, just like the ones that I spoke about a minute ago: size, shape, where it was feeding, when you saw it, where you saw it. It'll ask you those things. It'll give you a list with pictures of what it thinks the bird might be. You can scroll through them. You can look through several different pictures, male, female, look at the sounds, look at the map. It'll help you pick out which bird it is. If you have a picture of it and you just don't want to answer all the little multiple choice questions, you just put the picture in and it'll say, hey, I think it's this bird. Then you can say, yes, it is, or no, you're wrong. I think that this is not the bird. It's going to be something different. But even better, this is one of the newest tools I really, really like, is they have a sound identification tool now. So on the app, you can upload a recording of a bird, or you can just hold your phone up, have it listen to the bird. It'll tell you what it thinks it is. Really cool feature, very, very cool feature. And then Merlin partners with eBird, which I want to talk about that a little bit more later, but eBird is a database a bunch of birders use. They use it to keep track of lists. And you don't have to go out into the great unknown and bird to submit to eBird. You can just do it in your backyard. That's extremely helpful. You can keep track of things that you've seen over time. You can also go to their website and you can look at what's been seen in your area. So like what to keep an eye out for, what birds to look for in your area or at your feeders. Or you can use it to find hotspots, which are where a ton of birds are. Like the Ingomar Mounds, they're at eBird hotspot. The park along the river, that's an eBird hotspot. And you know that if you just want to, you only have like 30 minutes, you want to go see a ton of birds, those are the hotspots you want to go to. But I'll talk a little bit more about those later. So some questions that people usually have about birds in the winter are, how do they stay warm? Because they're so small and it's so cold. I mean, not right now, but generally in places where the weather is normal. And why do they sing in the winter? So for the first question, how do they stay warm? They have to use a lot of different techniques. If you'll notice, this northern cardinal, this male northern cardinal, he is a lot, I want to be polite, rounder than he usually is. And that's a good thing because he has been eating a lot, he has been consuming a lot, specifically high fat, because he wants to put on as much fat as possible. He wants to insulate with that layer of blubber. He's also really round though because what he's doing is he is fluffing up his feathers, which he keeps clean and dry, by the way, to make sure that he stays warm. He fluffs them up really big and he traps warm air underneath his feathers to keep himself warm. It's the same concept as down blankets, down jackets, exact same thing, just on the actual bird with the feathers that he has on him. They also cuddle. I think that's important to add to that. Birds cuddle. Why do they sing? Most of the time when we think about singing, we are familiar that they sing to attract a lady. They serenade. They wanna attract a lady for the spring. But birds also sing for marking territory and communicating with other birds around them about the environment. Maybe there's a hawk nearby, or maybe there's a snake nearby. They'll sing and they'll communicate and they'll chirp to tell other birds, hey, this is my territory, or stay away, it's my territory, stay away, there's a snake. Those are reasons that you'll hear them still in the winter, even though they're not trying to be Neil Diamond attracting a lady. Another question that you might ask yourself is, how can I support the birds in my backyard, or how can I attract them to my backyard? Because they are very charismatic, they're really fun to watch, and there's actually a lot of things that you can do for birds in your backyard. You can have a bird bath, and you can be really bougie if you want and have a heated bird bath so you don't have to walk outside and get rid of the ice. But, or you can just have a regular bird bath. They use this for drinking water, they use it to keep their feathers clean, to stay warm. You're also gonna want to have bird feeders and suet feeders that have high fat content in them. The fat is what they're gonna use to insulate themselves for the winter. And please don't boo me out of the room, but you'll want to keep your cat indoors. Cats, I love them. I have a cat myself. His name is Theodore, and he's beautiful. But cats are natural predators. They are really good at it. They've done studies on cats, and they have found that they just kill for fun. They're not hungry, they don't eat it, they're bored, or they're just using their many talents, which is to kill, unfortunately. So one of the best things that you can do for the birds in your backyard is to keep your cat indoors. One of the saddest but also interesting stories is of the Lyle's wren. There was a lighthouse keeper on this tiny island out somewhere. I don't remember exactly where it was, but he was a lighthouse keeper. He brought his cute little cat Tibbles, and Tibbles killed all of the Lyle's wrens on this tiny little island. And it was a flightless ground wren. And so now we don't have any more Lyle's wren because of Tibbles the cat. And it was only present on that one island. So, and I'm sure he wasn't that hungry. I'm sure he was just doing it because he was bored, nothing else to do on an island. But keep your cat indoors. And other thing you can do is you can plant native flowers, trees, shrubs. You can provide food, and you can provide shelter to the birds in your backyard. What is so great about planting native trees and shrubs and flowers is you don't have to keep refilling your feeder, or keep it clean, or keep the squirrels away, buy all these products and different feeders to keep other animals away. What's great is you're just providing them food source, you're providing them shelter that you don't have to do anything to. And you can kind of watch them in their natural habitat, and you're providing them with their native food, what they've evolved to eat and what they need. So that's something else that's really important. That's what Camp Creek Native Plants does, is they promote native plants for the wildlife. And if anyone would like to learn more about how to garden for wildlife, specifically birds, I welcome you to follow Camp Creek on social media or come by the shop. We share a lot of information about gardening for butterflies, birds, all these different things. Or you can talk to me about it, or you can do all three. Welcome all three. So then the last thing that you can do for birds is you can contribute to science. You can be a part of citizen science, which is the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by just members of the general public. And you can use those apps that I talked about before, like eBird, and Merlin can help you figure out what they are, and then you can put them on eBird. There's other apps that you can use, like Nest Watch, that's just observing nests in your area. There is iNaturalist, which is basically a field guide in your pocket for everything. Funguses, trees, birds, plants, anything you can think of, caterpillars, moths, butterfly. That's what iNaturalist is. You can use that. You can also participate in events like the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is a group of scientists that just, they want you to send them the data from your own backyard on a certain day every year. And that's something that you can do from your own backyard. But what's what's really cool about backyards is you can contribute to science from your own backyard. You don't have to be a researcher, you don't have to go to the marshes of Gulf Coast, Mississippi to contribute to bird conservation. You can do it from your own backyard. Researchers use this data all the time to study relative population sizes. You know, if a bunch of people see northern mockingbirds in 1 year, they know there's probably more than there were last year. And if the next year people don't really see northern mockingbirds, they go, oh, something happened. I need to look into that and see what caused people to not really see northern mockingbirds in their areas. They also use it to discover species where they're not usually at. You know, you might see a really weird bird at your feeder, and you might go, how do I figure out what that is, and what do I do about that? And you can put that on eBird, and people have found some really cool stuff that way. Birds in places they've never been before. Somebody saw a snowy owl in California last month, really wild in California. People were really astounded by that, but somebody had to take notice of that and tell other people about it. And they're also able to study how birds are expanding where they live and where they don't live. You know, the European starling, if we had eBird way back when the guy first introduced him into Central Park, and we had eBird, then we could have tracked just how they were growing and expanding across the North American state, and maybe we could have done something about that. Really cool story I read the other day actually had to do with iNaturalist. And these two boys in California, they went on the app, and on the app you can submit pictures of things that you don't know what they are, and then other people in the community, they can help you identify them. But these boys went on the app, they saw that there were scorpions that no one had identified yet, and so they went to the place where this person saw the scorpion, and they found them, and turns out that those were actually two new species that these teen boys discovered. And just really cool things like that. They're not scientists, they're not researchers, they're just people doing what they love to do, which is, well, boys loving to play in the dirt and play with scorpions, things that can hurt them more than they can hurt it. But just the whole point is you don't have to go anywhere other than your backyard to help out bird conservation. So here we come to one of the last slides. Here's where you can take one of the papers, it's on your table, and on there you have a spot where you can quiz yourself. I didn't put them all up, I didn't want to be too terribly mean to you guys. I put up 12 of them, but I thought you can test yourself this way, see if you learned any new ones, you know them all. These 12 right here, and then give yourself a grade at the bottom. And I'll give y'all a few minutes to do this, and I'll pop the answers up in just a second. But the last point that I wanted to make while y'all are doing your quizzes is just that backyard birds are quite special. They're fun to watch. They're very beautiful, but not only that, they have a really special place in our culture as well because they're so easily recognizable. You have birds like the eastern bluebird in Song of the South. You know, bluebird sitting on my shoulder. You have songs like Rockin' Robin. Everybody knows that song. Cardinals at this point are kind of synonymous with Christmas, I've noticed. You'll see them on pillows and cards and Christmas, I mean, I had them in this because wintertime presentation, gotta have cardinals. A personal story, when I was young and I was watching Mary Poppins, when she's singing about cleaning up, I don't know what the song's called, but clean up's a snap, and she's singing to the kids, gotta clean your room. She leans out her window and catches an American robin on her finger. And that was actually the first time that I ever saw that bird. And then I got to see it in the wild, and it was a really cool moment going, oh, I saw that on Mary Poppins, and now that's a real bird right in front of me. So they have this really special spot in culture because anywhere you go, you can find a lot of these birds. You can bird if you move houses. And what's great is you do not have to be an expert birder to bird in your backyard, to recognize some of these birds. You just have to be there. You just have to show up. And anytime you are in your backyard, or you're walking around, or you're in your friend's backyard, because of these birds, you can call yourself a birder. So thank you so much for listening to me ramble about birds. I enjoyed it. Honestly, I should have paid you guys to listen to me talk about birds, because it's hard to get this many people in one room. Let me just go on and on. But thank you so much for coming, listening about birds. If you have any questions, love to answer them.